Hello, everybody, and welcome to Sparing Partners. The topic today is one that somehow I have not covered yet in the whole life of the podcast. Now it's over 1 year old, which is fixed wireless access. And that's in a way it's all new and it's all old. I mean, we have wireless access forever, so that's nothing new. What is new is that you can do it over cellular spectrum. And so the question is like, how is that? How should we think about it? How is it working? And I have the pleasure today to talk to Mike Dano, who is the lead industry analyst at Ookla. New acquisition for Ookla, and so it's quite interesting. It's a great opportunity also to catch up with Mike, that who I've known for a very long time, and so let's just get started and see what is fixed wireless access. What does it mean for the users and for the service providers? So, Mike, tell us first all about your new job and
Yes.
what is it you do at Ookla and what you did before as well.
Yeah. Well, thanks for having me, Monica. I really appreciate it. And you're right. I was trying to think of, boy, we've known each other for years and years and years now. It's been a long time,
Long time.
long time. And you're right. This job at Ookla is relatively new for me. I for the past many years, several decades, I have been a journalist in the telecom industry. So, I started at RCR Wireless News and was there for a long time, and then moved over to Fierce, what's called Fierce Network today, and worked at Fierce for a long time. And I think you and I have spoken multiple times at those jobs. And then most recently, I was at Light Reading and was there for several years. And so now my new job is here at Ookla. So I'm transitioning a little bit from being a journalist to an analyst. But it's been a relatively soft landing for me, and I enjoy the work at Ookla, and I get to look at interesting topics such as fixed wireless.
And a lot of interesting data. So
Yes.
that must be really new. So what is it you do other than fixed wireless access?
Yeah.
Anything?
So I've gotten to look at a couple of different interesting things. As you probably know, Ookla has a lot of different data sets that we can apply to different questions. So among the, I only started a few months ago, but so far I've gotten to look at interesting things like Wi-Fi generations of Wi-Fi technologies. So the difference between Wi-Fi 4 versus Wi-Fi 7 and how that affects the user experience, and the vendors of those technologies and how they're being deployed by operators, specifically in Latin America. So I've gotten to do research on that, gotten to do research on satellites. So I've gotten to have written some interesting articles on, how Starlink speeds are affected by like a large group of users, such as those at the recent Burning Man festival in Nevada, and how Starlink speeds were affected by all those users. And so that was pretty interesting. Gotten to look at how the new direct-to-device technology works, particularly on Starlink and T-Mobile. So I've had a chance to look at that technology, and also fixed wireless. And you and I have both watched the rise of fixed wireless over the past several years. I got to cover that as a journalist at Fierce Network and then Light Reading, and so now I get to really look at how are the 5G networks handling fixed wireless? What are the speeds like? What is the market strategy like? How does fixed wireless compare to other technologies in specific locations? It's really interesting to now, previously as a journalist, I would listen to what AT&T and Verizon would say about fixed wireless, and now I can kind of take all those things that they've said and sort of apply that to the Ookla data set and see, what do the speeds look like? How does the network perform in different situations, different times of day? It's a lot of interesting stuff that you can really discern through the Ookla data.
Yeah, absolutely. So Asha, so since we're going to be talking, that's the plan to talk about fixed wireless access. But since you look at the satellite as well, I wanted to ask you something about how the two of them compare, because there is a lot of so fixed wireless access is the big new thing, but
Mhm.
satellite is too, because again, satellite a few years ago even was like, yeah, you really get it if you just have no other option, right? But now it's not quite like that. And so as you move out, could you just before we get into fixed wireless access, can you just say, what are the trade-offs between satellite and fixed wireless access? Because so isn't an issue with satellite now where if nobody has, or in there are a few users, we're good, but then if there is congestion, there is congestion. It's not easy to fix, which is, I guess,
Exactly.
is a
Yeah.
Burning Man kind of issue.
Right, exactly. Yeah, it's really interesting to watch. It's all sort of location. It's where you are. Is what determines what options you have and what options may be the best for you. So, I live in Denver, and fiber is quite plentiful in the neighborhood that I live in. So it's not really a problem, and the price is real good. So it makes a lot of sense for me to be on a fiber connection right now. But as I travel further outside of the city limits, my options change. Fiber is not quite as available, maybe a little bit more expensive, and fixed wireless becomes a much more viable option, as I travel throughout the city and further out into the suburbs. And so fixed wireless might make a lot more sense in those locations. And then, as I travel further out and head up into the mountains west of Denver, in those locations, satellite makes a lot more sense. And in a lot of cases, there is no other option. There's lots of places out in the mountains where there is no. Not only is there no fiber connection, not only is there no DSL connection, not only is there no fixed wireless connection, not only is there no cellular connection, right? Because fixed wireless is only
Yeah.
available in a subset of the cellular footprint. You basically have none of those options, and in that case, satellite is really your only option for a connection. And incredibly now, with newer satellite technologies, including those from SpaceX, Starlink. I mean, you can get a satellite connection in the middle of nowhere that is 100 megabytes a second. It's incredible.
Yeah, I mean that and it's not that expensive. So it's when you think about it, it's you have different options. Like I said, depending on where you are, but there's always, I guess, at this point, there's always something. Again, if you are in Manhattan, you don't want to use satellite because that actually wouldn't work. Or well, there's no point anyway.
Probably not. Yeah.
But probably
Yeah.
wouldn't end that. But as
Probably
you
not.
go out, you still have, which kind of, um, it used to be that, good broadband means fiber. So whatever you do, that was the solution. But now increasingly, and, especially when you think at, subsidies and all that, to kind of think of huge amounts of subsidies for fiber when it's so expensive to roll out, it's just not, that kind of mindset is doesn't seem to be
Yeah.
relevant anymore.
But there's always like sort of pros and cons
Mhm.
to that debate. And we've seen the U.S. government's BEAD program,
Mhm.
um, and it recently finished allocating funds to most of the state regulators have finished allocating funds. And so, the state regulators across the US still show a strong preference for fiber. But in some cases, the cost of connecting some of these locations it's insane. So I think we saw the recent allocation from the state of Alaska, and some of their fiber locations cost above $100,000 per location
It
to
doesn't make
connect
any
with fiber.
sense.
It's a pretty expensive proposition to connect those locations with fiber. And so in those cases, satellite can be a much more cost-effective option. But
Yeah.
then there's also issues with satellite connection. So one of the articles that I recently wrote for in my position here at Ookla is about the Burning Man Festival. And the article was looking at the speeds available over satellite for those attendees of Burning Man, and it just sort of highlights, there's challenges with fiber deployments. There's also challenges with satellite deployments, and so in this particular instance, so there's like, I think it's 50,000 people attend Burning Man every year. It's an event out in the middle of nowhere in the Nevada desert, so there's just no connections or very few connections. There's some cellular, but it's a difficult proposition to support that many users. Um, and the number of Burning Man attendees who have Starlink is actually quite high. And so we can see that in the Ookla data. And looking at the most recent Burning Man festival, we saw the Starlink during the event. We saw Starlink speeds dip over the course of that sort of week-long event, and then they began to rise after that event was over, which, for anyone who knows how networks work, that's a very normal thing, right? Once you load a lot of users into a particular area, you strain those network resources. And in the case of a cellular or a wireless or a satellite network, like that's how it works, right? There's a finite amount of resources. Once you start loading that network, those resources become constrained a little bit. So you can kind of see the speeds dip, but still, the one of the big takeaways from that was that the speeds did show a decline as a lot of users concentrated in one area, but the speeds declined to about 70 megabytes a second at the low point. And so that's still pretty good, right, for being out in the middle of nowhere, having a lot of Starlink users, and everybody's still getting 70 megabytes a second. So I think there's a lot of takeaways from that. One is that you do see a dip in speeds as there's a lot of users that are concentrated in one area, but also the speeds are still pretty good. Like they're, almost meeting the, FCC's 100 megabytes a second broadband benchmark. And so, it's an interesting takeaway to see that kind of those kinds of speeds and the capabilities of the network, and it's all about kind of where you are and what's happening around you.
And like I said, we need to kind of distinguish between what's ideal and what might happen, and again, said during Burning Man or whatever else. And as you say, as long as we have something that is sufficiently good, we are fine. I mean, because there is a question of like, how much more are we willing to pay in general? I mean, both as a service provider in terms of providing the service and in terms of the end user. So would you be willing to pay 3 times as much when you go to Burning Man, say, just to get a little bit of a faster connection? Probably not. Most
Mhm.
people say, well, okay, it's not perfect, but okay, I'll deal with it.
Yeah.
Mm,
Yeah, that the demand side is interesting because even here at home, I subscribe to 200 megabytes per
mhm.
second service. And it's a fiber connection, pretty reliable, pretty consistent no matter what I'm doing. Even if the whole family is home and everybody's, watching TV or doing stuff on the computer, that speed is fairly consistent. But I have not once have I found myself wanting a faster connection than 200 megabytes a second.
Yeah.
I assume that people have stuff that they're doing at home where they may need that, but for my uses, that is just fine with me.
Yeah. Well, I guess for most people, I mean, do you have a sense? Because, it just seems like a lot of people just want to have unlimited, the fastest, but especially if you have a phone. I mean, there's no point having, there's just so much you can do on a phone because the screen is limited. It's one
Yeah.
phone. I mean, at some point you don't need it.
Yeah, and what's interesting is within Ookla, a lot of my colleagues have started looking at, speed is only one sort of aspect of network
Mhm.
performance that we can look at, and another is latency. And so we're
Yes.
actually putting a lot of effort and time right now into looking at what latency means, how to track it in an effective way, and particularly as AI becomes more prevalent and more used and more capable, what does latency mean in an age of AI? And so those are all things that are changing. So, certainly speed is important. We definitely look at speed, and speed is a really, it's a proxy to what can the network do, what is it capable of. So speed is definitely important, but I think looking at other networking aspects beyond speed is also very interesting as well.
Yeah. Do you have a sense of how important those are? Because right now, when you see like an ad, whatever, we think of speed, that's it. I mean, well, we're getting a little bit more sophisticated in that, but at the same time, that's still like the major thing. But in terms of like the experience that people have, how important is reliability and latency, you think? I
Yeah.
mean,
Yeah, exactly. And Ookla publishes its benchmarks, the speed test benchmarks, and there's scores for reliability, there's scores for consistency. So certainly Ookla looks at all those measurements very, very carefully. And it's true that yeah, uh, and different network functions become more important based on what you're doing. So, for example,
yeah,
when I go out into the mountains, coverage is paramount for me, right? Like
yeah,
I'm not necessarily looking at Netflix, on the top of a mountain, but what I very am concerned about is if I break an ankle, can I, call for
yeah.
help?
Mhm.
Or here at home, you and I are having this conversation now, so I'd really like a reliable and a low latency connection so that we can have a natural conversation, and I'm not dropping out, and you're not you're able to hear everything that I'm saying, as I'm saying it, rather than slightly delayed. So yeah, as you move through your day, your networking needs change, and so it's interesting to think about those networking needs, and to be able to look at them, as people are moving through their days, weeks, and years. So yeah, you're right. People attending Burning Man may not need a super fast connection, but many of them are probably checking in on work. Maybe they're having video calls.
Yeah, but
Yeah, it's like it's and as as technology evolves, those needs may change. So far it does not seem like the Apple Vision Pro goggles, the VR goggles, are very popular, and I haven't seen a lot of people using them. But maybe that will change in the next 2 or 3 years, and maybe they will become more popular. And if they do become more popular,
then you have,
what are the networking needs then?
yeah. But also, you get from the point of view of whatever application you're using, they'll become more aware of the changes in the connection so they can compensate for whatever problem you have. So, now actually back to the Burning Man. I mean, so the people at Burning Man were obviously affected because they were there, but was there an effect for other people as well around it? Because it's not like the capacity is throughout the whole footprint of the satellite. So, you might not be a Burning Man, but it's like, what's going on here? Why is it all of a sudden slower? So who else was
Exactly.
affected?
Yeah. So we looked at. So it was really interesting because we looked at Pershing County, which is a county in Nevada where Burning Man is
Mhm.
held, and so we could see the Starlink speeds in Pershing County were really affected, or not really affected, but you could see the
Yeah.
effect
Mhm.
in Starlink speeds in Pershing County. On a Nevada state level, so statewide Starlink speeds, you could see a little bit of an effect,
But not
just a little
much.
bit.
Mhm.
And on a nationwide, if across the whole U.S., you could not see an effect. So yeah, the sort of the radius of an effect on a networking level is interesting to watch.
Yeah, so it's obviously wider because if it was fixed wireless access, so fiber would be just there, but it
Exactly.
doesn't really, it's kind of like that. So
Exactly. Yeah.
no,
Yeah.
yeah, and so yeah, I think that this is really interesting because on one end we depend much more on connectivity, but you also probably learn to become more flexible about it. So as long as we have the basics, as you say, as long as I break an ankle, I have a way to communicate, and as long as I can use Google Maps or text or voice, I'm okay. Then if the other things don't work all that well, it's like, well, whatever.
Yeah.
I'll just
Yeah. And from the perspective of fixed wireless, it's been
Mhm,
interesting to watch how operators are leveraging fixed wireless as they expand their footprint.
mhm,
And so another article I worked on was specifically looking at AT&T and T and specifically in Houston. And that's an interesting market because the AT&T fiber network covers much of sort of the greater Houston area. And then you can see how they're using fixed wireless to expand beyond the reach of their fiber network, sort of to cover even a greater
yeah,
footprint of the
mhm.
Houston metro area. And so even in the article that I wrote, I quoted one of the executives from the cell tower operator Crown Castle, and that person said how Houston is an excellent example of how to use fixed wireless because Houston is a city that it's actually the second fastest growing city in the U.S. So people are arriving inside of the greater Houston metro area as well as on the outskirts. They're building out, that city is expanding, and so as that city expands, fixed wireless could be a great technology for an operator to use to expand the reach of their network, even faster than they could build fiber, for example. And so
Yeah,
we've been talking about how users are looking at their connection. What kind of connection do I need at this time? And you can almost look around it from the operator perspective. So the operators are looking at, well, here's all the people I can cover with fiber, and maybe I can reach those additional markets and those additional users with fixed wireless.
yeah, and I think that that's actually, because oftentimes, just think of fixed wireless access as a new service, which it is for 5G from a 5G perspective, or 4G, whenever they use 5G, 4G. But really is kind of an alternative or a fill-in strategy because, in your neighborhood where you have fiber and it's not that expensive, what's the point of doing fixed wireless access? I mean, you can if you want to compete, but probably there's not a whole lot of reason to do that. It's where you do not have fiber, and that's so that is seems like a good solution. And in fact, um, you know, isn't there a way in which, let's say you have in Houston, you just have you build new homes in some area. Does it even make sense to have fiber there if you have a good fixed wireless access throughout?
Yeah, yeah, I think it's interesting. I mean, I know that internet connections are becoming, obviously much more important to modern
Yeah.
life. And so as real estate developers look at new locations, they're pulling in a fiber provider, ahead of
Mhm.
time so that
Mhm.
when people buy their house, they have
Yeah.
a great fiber connection. But even in those cases, it's interesting to watch. um, a fixed wireless provider can come in as an
As a,
alternative
yeah.
to existing providers. So maybe you can buy a fiber connection that's $100 a month, or you have
Yeah.
a fixed wireless connection that may be $50 a month, or even cheaper than that, right?
Yeah.
So it's I think Houston is a great example of all of these issues playing out. So there's suburbs of Houston where you can see some fiber providers are already providing service, but there's also a fixed wireless alternative.
So that would be,
Um,
yeah, that would be the alternative. So maybe a lower cost, or
yeah, lower
it just
cost,
different per different provider. Yeah.
maybe not as fast as the fiber option, but maybe cheaper. And so for some customers, now going back to the view of the customer, maybe some customers are really concerned about that monthly expense, and maybe fixed wireless is a viable alternative for
Yeah.
what they want and need to do with an internet connection.
Now, in those cases, well, how much of a difference in terms of, I mean, obviously the throughput is not going to be the same, but about reliability, or how do they compare? Where you
Sure.
have fiber and, fixed wireless access.
Yeah, exactly. So we did look. So I did look at the speeds available in Houston specifically, and some of the findings were interesting. So, for example, AT&T seems to be expanding their fixed wireless availability in Houston, and the Ookla speeds that we found in the month of September were about 100 megabytes a second.
Mhm.
Um, And so that compares to, the AT&T fiber network in Houston routinely shows a median speed of 360, megabytes a second, which is, much faster. Same thing, other providers in the area. We saw Comcast's median download speeds in Houston almost at 300 megabytes a second, and other fiber providers were showing even faster speeds. EZ Fiber there in Houston was showing median download speeds of more than 500 megabytes a second. So, you can see all these different speeds that are available, but at the same time, AT&T's fiber footprint in Houston doesn't extend to some of the Houston suburbs like Conroe or League City, but their fixed wireless service can be offered into those suburbs where AT&T does not offer fiber. And so in that case, AT&T can still potentially play for those customers in those suburbs with its fixed wireless service.
And the incremental cost of expanding fixed wireless access is much lower than building fiber, obviously. So
Exactly. So the Fiber Broadband Association has a cost of almost $20 per foot if you're building fiber underground. So yeah, the cost of reaching those suburbs is pretty serious and time consuming. But fixed wireless could be, depending on the amount of network capacity that an operator may have. Fixed wireless might be an option that they could offer to those customers, in advance of building fiber to those neighborhoods, or as an alternative to building fiber to those neighborhoods, as they could offer fixed wireless services. And then the final thing, so the thing I think is interesting, so I hate to admit it, but I'm a little bit of a spectrum nerd. I've always found it fascinating to look at spectrum ownership, who's buying spectrum, who's selling spectrum, what kind of spectrum, operators are deploying. And so this was part of what we looked at in the Houston market. And there the findings are real interesting because AT&T is in the process of buying spectrum from EchoStar. And so it has the option of increasing its spectrum holdings in Houston by almost 25% for the mid-band spectrum. So as AT&T works to close that acquisition of EchoStar's spectrum, it stands to increase its spectrum holdings in the Houston market by almost 25%, which means additional capacity that can be used for a fixed wireless connection. So, if the amount of spectrum that a 5G operator has is often directly related to the speeds that it can provide. And so if AT&T's fixed wireless service currently, supplies speeds of about 100 megabytes a second, here's this EchoStar spectrum that it could add to its network. And that additional EchoStar spectrum would probably allow AT&T to increase the speeds that it can provide through fixed wireless, and then also support additional customers.
But it's actually, fixed wireless access is a very good way to increase spectrum utilization, because typically where you have fixed wireless access is not in the, very dense traffic areas. So it's in areas where, sort of by definition, an operator would have extra capacity.
Exactly. And so, yeah, and that's one of the neat things we looked at too, is one of the things that Ookla data can do is map out where customers are. And so we were able to look at the Houston market and where AT&T is offering fixed wireless, and it's really scattered throughout the entire metro area. And that's kind of what you would expect to see, right? You wouldn't expect to see a large number of fixed wireless customers in one location, because then you'd see that Burning Man effect. You'd overload that network. There'd be too many customers using that limited network resource. And so instead, what you see with AT&T's fixed wireless business across Houston is it's really spread out over the whole metro area, so that not one customer or a group of customers isn't going to overload that network. That they're sort of spreading out all of that network usage and sort of maintaining network capacity. And that's, I think, the whole trick about fixed wireless, is that these operators are using it in pockets where they have extra network capacity. They're still able to support their smartphone customers in addition to the to the fixed wireless customers. And I think that's, that whole balance is still playing out. And okay, here's the last thing I'll mention about this, because I just think it's so interesting, is that uh, just yesterday, we heard from SBA Communications, which is one of the big cell tower operators in the U.S., and they got onto their quarterly conference call, and they were talking about fixed wireless. And so the SBA CEO said that they're seeing a greater proliferation of 5G use cases, and fixed wireless is a big one, and that he's expecting a total of 15 million fixed wireless subscribers today across AT&T, Verizon, T-Mobile, and that's going to probably grow to close to 20 million by 2028. So, that is a fairly substantial, right, chunk of the U.S.
Yeah.
broadband market here is 20 million fixed wireless customers by 2028.
And that's really important because in the US, there's a very limited competition on fabric, for the obvious reasons that it's hard to, it's not like in Europe where you have one fiber network that is used by different service providers. So there is more competition. In the US, you don't have that. So just limit. So I guess that fixed wireless access is even more important in terms of the competition. But also, the capacity that you have, given the same amount of spectrum, can also change, because if you have, whatever, you serve one operator serves one area, but then if they have more subscribers, they can have a different set of antennas. So you have the more massive MIMO, because where your customers are. So
Exactly.
it's there's not a whole. I mean, you can expect, and you can increase capacity. You can increase spectrum utilization by just bumping up the kind of infrastructure. Is that what you're seeing? Is that what are the operators are using?
Yeah, yeah, we're certainly seeing the amount of spectrum that they own and the amount of spectrum that they're using, and certainly that is increasing as operators look to support fixed wireless. And I like to think of it as it's a really neighborhood by neighborhood deployment. So
yeah,
you can imagine a cell tower that sits right between a freeway and a neighborhood, right? On the freeway side, you'd point all your antennas at the freeway. Everybody on the freeway is using their smartphone, right? On the other side of that tower, you'd have antennas pointing at the neighborhood, and that usage is obviously much different, right? If you're offering fixed wireless into that neighborhood, those are all stationary users. You can expect the traffic pattern would be much different. Probably
yes.
evening usage, versus sort of commuter usage on the freeway side. So I think it's all about balancing that type of use, and making sure that your networking resources are sort of devoted, to what's happening on that side of the cell tower.
Mm-hmm. And you can use more the spectrum resources more or less intensively based on the demand, and that can grow with time. So if you have 10 subscribers today, that's what you need. If all of a sudden you have 100 of them because there is new construction, you can change the infrastructure to serve more of them. So it's not, there is some flexibility there. Now let's go back to the 100 versus 300 megabits per second, because we kind of use that, the more the merrier, but is it really true? So I mean, how many people, because you just like, most of the time people have pay for whatever, but they actually use a very small fraction of it. So maybe it doesn't really make a whole lot of difference to have 100 versus 300.
Exactly. So yeah, like I said, we're spending a lot of time thinking about that right now
Yeah.
inside of the Ookla research team. And I think a couple of thoughts on that. I mean, one is that anyone who has said that, oh, no one will ever use more than 5 megabits a second, 10 megabits a second, 100 megabits a second. Any operator that's made that bet, no one will ever need this much, always wrong. So I'm reluctant to ever say that, oh, there's no need for a 1 gigabyte connection. I think any prediction along those lines will be overtaken by future events at some point. And so that's why I say what we're really trying to think of, like, well, what's the future usage going to look like? How is AI going to change future internet usage? So you're right. Today, if you're watching Netflix, Netflix can stream, I think, down to almost 2 megabits a second. This quality isn't that great. Once you try to get an HD stream or real high definition stream of Netflix, you still don't really need more than 10, 50 megabits a second. So what are these, much faster networks going to be capable of? Well, what are people offering? One of the things that we saw recently was that uh, cable company Charter recently signed a deal with Apple. And the deal was that Charter has a stake in the Los Angeles Lakers basketball team. And they're going to stream Los Angeles Lakers basketball games to users of the Apple Vision Pro VR goggles, right? And so what you do is you put the VR goggles on, and now you're at a Lakers game. You can look around. It's like you're
Mhm.
sitting in the seat.
Mhm.
It's a fully immersive experience. And Charter said that service requires 150 megabit per second connection, just to stream those Lakers
Yeah.
games. And so I think that's an interesting data point, as entertainment services evolve, right? So that's just a stream of a Lakers game. Now imagine if you're streaming, or if you're, having a VR conversation with someone in the metaverse, for example. You and I are in the metaverse, and now we can see each other's bodies, and we're sitting in a coffee
Mhm.
shop, and the whole environment is streamed around us. What does that service, what are the network requirements of that service? And now take that a step further. So there's AI programs like ChatGPT and stuff. They're just now beginning to develop video, and I think in the near future they're going to be developing virtual reality environments on an as
Mhm.
needed basis. So
Mhm.
you can imagine a future, not too distant future, where AI is creating a real-time virtual environment for you with your VR goggles that you are experiencing with other people in real time. Now, those network requirements are presumably much more than streaming a Netflix TV show to your TV, right? And so in that future, which I think is not definite but probable, the network requirements are much higher and much more rigorous than they would be today. And so I think, yeah, if my connection is 200 megabits a second, is that gonna stream a Lakers game to me? It might. Is that gonna stream
Yeah.
a virtual reality AI generated world, metaverse? I don't know. I may have to upgrade in the
Yeah.
future.
But yeah, and actually, I just was in Shanghai, so I went for that kind of experience, and it
Mm,
was amazing because they track your body, so it's not just you get. I mean, it's just the whole interaction with your team, but
wow.
then a lot of it is just local. So I guess the question is, how is that going to be? But then again, and if you are in a stadium, it's different than if you are at home. So, but and so like I said, we don't know. But today, I mean, I think that we kind of overestimate what we need on a,
Mhm,
which is not to say that clearly in the long term, God knows what um because on top of all this sort of virtual reality stuff, you just have if your home is connected and you have a lot of cameras, a lot of things going on, well, there is the sort of baseline continuous traffic that is not mediated by you or your family members. So you have the constant connection is not because you do something, it's just you just need a connection the same way that you need electricity for whatever, for the fridge that goes on all the time 24 hours a day, that
mhm,
kind of thing. So it's hard to know, but on the other hand, it's also true that for the time being, fixed wireless access is for most people is probably just as good as fiber for what they do today, right? So
exactly. Yeah, I certainly think so. I mean, for my needs, yeah, I think that 100 megabits a second, 200 megabits a second, perfectly
you're
useful.
able to live with that.
I'm able to live with that. No problems. Yeah, no problems. Not yet.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Mike, it was great to talk to you. Our time is up, but we should catch up when we're going to have this immersive experience, which I don't think is going to take too long before we actually get them and see what's how's that going to change. or
We'll
AI
see.
for that
We'll see.
matter.
Yeah, we'll see. It'll be interesting times. Next few years, interesting times.
Absolutely. Mike, thank you so much, and great catching up with you.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
And thank you all for listening. I hope you find it interesting, and keep listening to Sparring Partners on your favorite podcast platform.